What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Hodl My Beer podcast. Excited to do this episode today. I think there's been a lot of there's always a talk in the bull market of number go up, and that's certainly an important part of the Bitcoin network, right? That's what draws the big capital to it. That's what keeps the miners getting paid and, allows the network to continue and grow and flourish. So like number go up is definitely important. But I wanted to talk today about some of the other use cases that people maybe aren't as, familiar with. First and foremost, guys, I don't have any sponsors for the podcast. So if you're listening to this, all I ask is that you guys check out OpenSats. It is a complete nonprofit run by Bitcoiners, a board of Bitcoiners that, donate sats to developers working on the network. And if you're new to the game, guys, that's how Bitcoin is where it is today. It's from people donating their time, donating their energy and their money, right? Their proof of work, to continue to build on this network, to make things like Lightning possible, to make developments like eCash possible, right? To strengthen the network, secure the network. And a lot of these people, don't know where the next paycheck is coming from. So please check out OpenSats. And please, if you are able to, give any sort of donation to them, that's something that I think is super important that we can't lose sight of as the network grows, right? Bitcoin is winning, but it hasn't won yet, right? And the developers in the space and the guys that are way smarter and more technically sound than an 80 IQ pleb like me are super important to the network. So like I said, we're going to cover the other use cases that I've seen for Bitcoin. There's a ton of them. I'm sure I'm not going to get through all of them. I don't know how long this episode's going to be. It could be 20 minutes. It could be 45 minutes. It could be an hour. So we will just get into all of that and see where we land. So the first one that I wanted to talk about is let's see here. And guys, I'm not a professional podcaster. Why don't we start with this? If you guys listened to the episode with Josh last week, who was absolutely fucking incredible at kind of breaking down a lot of the technical aspects. Everything that kind of came out of his mouth, in my opinion, was fantastic. So if you haven't checked that episode out, please do. But what we're seeing, I think, in America is we're seeing Bitcoin miners stabilize the grid. And he was talking about how in Texas, since they brought Bitcoin miners there, they haven't had an outage. And it's been a couple of years. So you think about it, Texas, when I was living out in California, Texas every other week, would get hit with these storms or whatever it might be. And they wouldn't be able to stabilize their own grid. And so what's essentially happened is the Bitcoin miners have come in there, and when they have a surplus of power, the Bitcoin miners eat up that surplus of power, right? And they do what they do best, right? They mine Bitcoin. And when the grid has a shortage of power or energy, they power down the Bitcoin miners. So it's this perfect harmony that is very tough to achieve. And you can see it with wind farms, you can see it with solar panels. That stuff is very costly to power up and power down. And so what Bitcoin miners have done is just kind of fill in the gaps when needed, right? And I think there's this misconception that, the miners are coming in and they're using a ton of power and it's not good for the environment. And I think that FUD's kind of died a little bit, but it's still there. And I think a really good thing to explain to people is that there's a lot of areas that have a ton of power, a ton of energy that's being generated, and that energy just gets wasted, right? If you don't use it at the time, it's very hard to contain. And so Bitcoin miners are, just coming in and filling that gap. And I think that kind of brings us to the next point. So I'll have to look up who it was, but they were on Preston Pish's podcast about I don't know, probably 3-4 months ago. He also has a fantastic Bitcoin podcast that comes out once a week. Yeah, he's one of my favorite people in the space because of the people he has on and how they break things down. But they had somebody who's working on Bitcoin in Africa, and I want you guys to really think about this for a second. So, energy is how civilization moves forward, right? If you can't power your fridge, if you can't power air conditioning, right? If you can't build things because you don't have the energy to make steel or, things like that. Energy is like the most pro humanity thing that we have. Like that's how civilization is built. So when you look at villages in Africa, which is where they were speaking about here, that's a big reason that they can't move civilization forward in a lot of these villages, is because like if you're a power provider, are you gonna put up power lines for miles and miles through the African jungles and deserts and all of those things? And what the hell's the word? Why can't I think of it? The safari, right? Are you going to put up power lines there when you have a population that's so poor that you'll never get a return on your investment? Absolutely not. But guess who can generate power from anywhere at very little cost? Bitcoin miners, right? So now you have Bitcoin miners that are going into pockets of Africa that are 60, 70 years behind because of how remote they are. And they're turning a profitable operation because there's a lot of like natural raw resources there. And so I just think that's super incredible, right? Like that, when we talk about what Satoshi does, or what Satoshi did rather, with the aligned incentives of Bitcoin, it stretches so far and wide all over, right? To the point now where the reason that a civilization is behind and hasn't been able to advance, like Bitcoin literally fixes that. And I think that's super, super powerful. And there's I want to do this justice. Hold on. Sorry, bear with me, guys. Pulling this up right now. I don't have a Jamie like Joe Rogan, right? Um, so there's a book, and I want to plug Charlene Charlene Hill Federico is the author of the book. It's called The Bitcoin Leap: How Bitcoin is Transforming Africa. So like aside from right in like I think one of the highest used or one of the most well adopted regions of Africa as far as Bitcoin's concerned is Nigeria, right? Because of the currency and currency devaluation, which we all know about, right? The currency devaluation is a reason why a lot of third world places are jumping onto the Bitcoin network. But the Bitcoin Leap talks about everything, including that it's doing for Africa. So I would definitely recommend people check out that book to kind of go into more detail about how the miners are doing things and, really just like slowly transforming the whole region. And so when we talk about the miners, I mean, somebody brought this up the other day on Twitter. They were saying that when people realize that electric heaters and Bitcoin miners are the same thing, that's when the change will happen. So there's people forming companies right now that are literally figuring out how a Bitcoin miner can heat a home, right? So like imagine that, like if in 30 years every heater also doubles as a Bitcoin miner. I mean, why wouldn't you? If the technology's there, right? You're already using the power. So you take the heat that the Bitcoin miner pumps off and now you're using it to heat homes. I mean, I think that's super incredible as like a thought experiment going into the future. Now, obviously, um, we have the Bitcoin miners stabilizing the grid, what they're doing in what they're doing in parts of the world where it's not profitable for energy companies to go out there, but it's profitable for miners to go out there. I mean, those are huge, huge impacts. When we talk about that this is a story I wanted to share. So, and I probably should have started with this, but again, right, we're winging it tonight. Um, I was on Twitter this weekend and I was giving away some sats to try to build the following a little bit, try to promote the podcast. Um, and I sent somebody on the other side of the world who was in the Middle East. I was able to send them 25,000 sats for no fee. Again, through the Lightning Network. It was sent through Strike. I get it. I'm not running, a Lightning node or anything like that. As I said, I hope to get there, and I hope I'm not blaming the ignorance, on this. But I hope to get to the point where I'm that technically sound to do that. But I sent it through Strike to somebody on the other side of the world in 30 seconds. Dude, when I lived in Australia, when I was a broke post college kid in Australia, I would get like I had to at one point have my parents send me 250 or $300. It took 5 days to get there, and Western Union took 10% of what was sent. Like, think about this, guys. This is the real world fucking utility that we're talking about when people just don't understand fundamentally what is Bitcoin's use case. I don't know, powering villages in fucking Africa. I don't know, sending money across the world for no fucking fee. Like, these are the things that we're talking about. And this, like, we talk a lot about on like crypto Twitter or Bitcoin Twitter in general is like, how do I orange pill my family, right? Like, how do I orange pill my friends? Like, show them the real world use cases of it, right? Some people, and you can go down the rabbit hole of store of value, what is money, right? Like, all of those things. But like, a lot of people can't comprehend that. And frankly, like, I think that's a lot of the reason that people struggle with orange pilling friends, family, people that are close to them. It's because they like people especially if you're in the US, right? Like, if you're in a country that is under sanctions, or if you're in a country where the currency is being devalued 50% overnight, like, it's easy to put yourself in that position. But if you live in a country like the UK or the US or Germany or Spain or something like that, like, it's a slow burn because those currencies have more value outside of outside of like just that country, right? But like, when your currency's pegged to the US dollar, and the US dollar inflates by 10%, what does that do to your currency, who, when they're probably also inflating that, God knows how much, right? Like, that's what we've seen in Turkey. That's what we've seen in Venezuela. That's what we've seen in Argentina. So it's harder for people to put themselves in that position. And I think that, people are slowly starting to come around to that. And I'm going on a tangent here, but I think this is super important. When you guys are pitching, and I hate the word pitching, it's so fucking salesy, so I apologize, but that's what I do for a living I pitch a lot. But when you're talking to friends and family about Bitcoin, we have to get away from in my opinion, of course, we have to get away from the get rich quick tonality that we talk to friends and family about. I recently got my dad and my mom, who are, they're the reason I put them in separate camps is because they haven't been together in 20 years, right? So it was two separate conversations. But I got both of them to start buying a little bit at a time, because I was just like, guys, like, it's not that you're going to put, $10 into this thing anymore and become a millionaire. It's what are your other options, right? And that's I think the most effective route, because when people see $100,000 Bitcoin, they're not like numbers like $1 million a Bitcoin even, or 10 million a Bitcoin, or like, we know that because fiat has no bottom, that Bitcoin has no top. Um, like that, we know that, but like it's very hard for people who aren't in this space to comprehend numbers like that for magical internet money, right? When they don't fully understand the history of money. So like you just let them know, hey guys, there's a fixed supply of this stuff. They're not, they release a little bit. There will only ever be 21 million. And it's either do this or you can watch your savings wither away as you've done the last few years. And I think because inflation's so bad and people go to the grocery store in the US at least, and they see that, the groceries they bought 4 years ago, now they're buying half as much with the same amount of fiat dollars. Like I think that point is getting through. And that's how I got them in. I was just like, hey guys, just take a little bit of, every week, put a little bit into Bitcoin, because I'm fully, just because I'm fully allocated doesn't mean that's what you need to do. But, it makes, like Satoshi said, it might make sense to get a little bit of this stuff in case it catches on. And I think that's the more realistic way to kind of orange pill people. But again, I know I got off on a tangent there. I think that's super important. The what kind of started us down that path was the real world utility and the use cases. And you tell them I tell this to I've been open about this. Like I used to be extremely liberal until I found Bitcoin, right? And so it was a hard journey for me because it wasn't just like learning something new. It was challenging the old set of beliefs that I had, and realizing that this was the actual way, right? And so what I do to, a lot of my friends that maybe don't fit the Bitcoin ethos is like share those stories of, hey man, it's not bad for the environment. It's actually stabilizing the grid, right? It's actually providing power to civilizations that need it. And the people that care about those things can't look at this with a straight face anymore and have any reason to, not be involved, right? And I think what's super interesting about where we're at in Bitcoin right now is like all of these things are coming to a head, right? Like a lot, I'm not going to say all, a lot of the FUD has been destroyed. A lot of the like a lot of people are seeing inflation really no matter where you are in the world. It's running hot. The CPI is a fucking lie. Everybody knows that, right? They're saying it's 2.9% inflation, but they take out steak and they replace it with dog shit and they say that inflation hasn't moved. Like CPI is not correct. If you look at the actual rate that the monetary supply is growing, right? It's about 10 to 12% a year, which is coincidentally the rate that the S&P goes up on an annualized basis. So do with that information what you will. So let's talk about we kind of talked about it a little bit, but like I want you guys to put yourself in the position of, like, let's say you are somebody who went to another country to give your family a better life, right? Let's say you're from Argentina and you are, you got a visa to work in America and now you're sending money home every week to your family. Like, one, we already talked about the Western Union aspect of it, right? It takes 4 to 5 days to get there. They rob you fucking blind. And then your family barely gets anything that you send home, right? Also think of the logistics like this. If you're in an unsafe country in, Latin America or in Africa, and you're going to you're probably traveling 150, 200 miles to the closest Western Union. Two, that's where, like, it's most of the time it's in a city where there's a ton of violence. So not only are you sending money home every week to Western Union and they're robbing you fucking blind, your family is being put in harm's way and has the chance of being robbed, depending on where they're at, because they have to gather at that Western Union and they pull out either the cash or the currency of whatever, that country is. Um, when you logistically think of it, like that's where the real power in this thing is. Versus you get an account on, and again, I use Strike, so I'll always plug them for free. But you get an account on Strike and now you're able to send money immediately back to your family. Like that. No traveling, no Western Union fees, no chance of putting your family in harm's way because they have to walk out with a bunch of cash and then get on a bus to travel 200 miles back to wherever your home is in whatever village it's at, right? Like that's the power of this thing. And so like this is coincidentally, guys, this is also why I'm a huge fan of what Paolo and Tether are doing with stablecoin space. One, if you're in America, you would care about this, right? Like it helps America maintain its dominance if more people around the country are using it. And again, I'm not a fan of politicians, right? I consider myself to be very libertarian now, but you have to understand that like if the US doesn't have dominance, who gets it? It's probably China, right? It's probably one of the BRICS nations. So like, would you rather enter an era of like a communist based world global superpower, or would you rather the US, for all of its flaws, which it has a ton of, would you rather the US still maintain its power longer into the future? And obviously the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve is going to help that hugely if it's something they follow through on. But the other aspect of it is the fact that it, like, now if you're in a country in third world that doesn't operate off of, that's not operating off, like if you're in like a BRICS nation and you're able to get a stable coin now and you don't have to save your wealth, like there's, how do I put this in the right way? When you don't know where your next meal is coming from, you're not thinking about saving in Bitcoin, right? And if you're saving in a currency that devalues at 50%, a year, 25% a year, and that's just what they tell you, right? Like that's their official inflation index that the government publishes, which they always lie about, right? It happens in the US, it happens all over the world. If you're living in a country like that and you can never get ahead, like you're not thinking about saving in Bitcoin. And I think what Tether's done, one, they're Bitcoiners. Like you can tell when Paulo speaks, like they're over collateralized. I think including all their Bitcoin holdings, they're 120%. So they're 20% over collateralized versus the dollars that they have, through their treasury bonds that they purchase. This is providing an on-ramp. Stablecoins and Tether specifically is who I'm talking about. They're providing an on-ramp for people to start to get ahead and save in dollars, right? So like that's step one. Like that's if you're in a country and you don't, like, your currency's being devalued, you're not like I'm going to put everything in Bitcoin, right? It's like, all right, let me just let me get out of the currency that devalues 30%, 40% a year, and let me get into the US dollar, right? And now you're able to start putting away a little bit of money, right? You have stable coins. So now if shit hits the fan, you're protected a little bit, right? I think it was North Korea that just completely devalued their currency. I don't remember when it was, and I could be wrong. So like, again, I'm a little a little slow. So like fact check me on this if you're listening to it and you're like, that's not right. But I believe it was North Korea who one day just decreed that their dollar was dead. Your savings were now worthless and you could only redeem a certain amount. Like that's fucking terrifying, dude. Imagine if you had millions of dollars saved. Your entire life you worked and you put money away. And now they're like, hey, you saved millions of dollars over all of your time, energy, and effort that you put in to your work your entire life. Here's 50 grand. Like that's the reality here. And that's why I think what Tether's doing is super important, because it's allowing people to start to think about the future. And guess what, guys? Like if people can start to get ahead, and like actually start to think about the future, where do you think the money's going to go? Like, as these people build any sort of like somewhat sizable positions, what do you think the next logical step is? Right. And that's Tether, stablecoin, whatever it is, if it's not Tether, if it's something else, doesn't really matter. That's stablecoin to Bitcoin. And I think that that's what people like. Tether is not um, competing with Bitcoin, right? Stablecoins are not competing with Bitcoin. If anything, they're helping the broader ecosystem if it's done in a responsible way. Which like I said, I think that the Tether guys are Bitcoiners, and it seems like they are. Any interview you hear with Paulo, and look, they put their money where their mouth is. They own a shitload of Bitcoin too. So again, we talked about the third world without borders, right? Like being able to send money home, remittances, the safety and the cost versus Western Union. The Tether and Bitcoin in third world countries being the on ramp. And look, the other thing that I think we didn't even cover is like the refugee use case, right? Like if you're leaving a country, actually, I know I have this book here somewhere. Where is it? Let me grab it real quick. So Vijay Boyapati, right here, wrote The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. Great book. Check it out if you haven't read it. But I think he tells the story of like going, I forget where he was from, but he was, his family's a refugee, and he remembered like their family trying to take as much gold as they could with them across borders, right? And what happened? What's the issue with that? Like you guys have all heard this, I'm sure, but you can't carry. There's only so much gold you can carry. Now with this sort of, with something like Bitcoin, you can carry it in your head, right? You can carry it in a flash drive, and it can be millions, billions of dollars if you have that much Bitcoin. So like, not only, I want to take this a step further. It's not just like, okay, great, you're able to move your money from a war-torn country or somewhere that's requiring you to be a refugee to somewhere that's safer. Like, also think about what that does for the future generations of that family. Like, if that family gets to the new country and they're not completely poor and they're not scraping to get by, like, how does that project into the future? Because that's what really gets me excited about all this stuff, right? Is now you have somebody who's a refugee coming into a country, but they don't need handouts from the government, right? They're able to actually build a life, right? Their kids are able to grow up not in extreme poverty. Maybe, right? Now that you were able to bring all your Bitcoin with you and you're not starting from zero, maybe, the mother or father is around more often to actually be able to help the kids grow, right? And that's the thing that like super, I think that's super powerful for humanity, for civilization. And it's incredible. And so like when you start to think, like sometimes we talk about, again, number go up and how important it is. And it is, right? Because Bitcoin is a store of value, right? But it's also an exit ramp in so many ways for people that are going through, some really tough things. Two more things I want to get into, guys. Where am I at? 30 minutes? Cool. So I think, and I'm going to get into this when I'm going to have double AA Stack on the show sometime soon. We had to reschedule, but Bitcoin, like the housing crisis right now, guys, like why is housing so expensive? It's because it's the best store of value asset, right? There's so much money in real estate that is put there just so people can save wealth. Like that's a use case on its own. Like, I don't want to lose that's the biggest use case for Bitcoin. And I think, Saylor and Jack Mallers do an incredible job highlighting this. But like, that's a $450 trillion asset class currently. Is like, I fucking made my money. I went to work. I just want it to last into the future. Right? And there's a lot of things. Look, I am in the real estate industry every day of my life. That's what I do for my, my full-time career. There's a lot of pluses to real estate. But the reason that housing costs are so expensive is because now you're bidding with people that are not even like using the house. And so like and we're seeing it. I mean, I've met just in the, I got back on Twitter in December. I've met 3 people that are real estate investors that are like getting out of real estate because they're like, hey, the tenants are causing a headache. It's not, I'm getting whatever, $200 cash flow a month and the appreciation is 8% a year. Like we just said they're printing 10 to 12% a year in monetary terms, like the US dollar. So like, yeah, there's going to be cases where, sorry guys, got something in my mouth here. Got it. There's going to be cases where real estate is super profitable, but I think it's going to become less of like buying any property you can get your hands on that like might pencil as a deal to like actually buying properties where the profit margin makes sense. Because now you're going to be comparing real estate to the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin, right? The CAGR that people always talk about, compound annual growth rate. So like now when you're going to buy a property 10 years in the future, if it's an investment, you're going to be like, can I get 30% on my money this year? Right? If not, then it's not beating Bitcoin. So like, why would I do it? And I think that that's what we're going to see in the real estate industry is this start to get demonetized because a lot of the people that are doing it are just like, hey man, I want rentals so that I can be rich in the future. Right? And up until now, like I would argue that I would argue that real estate has been the king as far as projecting wealth in the future. But when you actually put the expenses up and like, Saylor talks about the, how quickly real estate devalues over the course of 50 years or something like that. It's no comparison. Bitcoin projects 1,000 years into the future. And so I think that that's super important. The last thing I wanted to touch on that I think is super cool. And I'm sorry, I'm going to try to not fucking butcher this, but the Bitcoin backed bonds, and it might not be for the reason you think. Like, I think the Bitcoin backed bonds, Andrew, I forget his last name, but he's from New Market Capital. Is talking about the Bit bond, at the Bitcoin for America. It was called Bit Bond, an idea whose time has come or something like that. I recommend everybody check it out because he'll explain it much better than I will. So essentially what's going to roll out is a bond that is backed by the US Treasury and also backed by Bitcoin. And what that can do for the US economy. I mean, like the base case for that was paying off our entire debt with Bitcoin combined with the bond. So the way that they had it laid out is say you get 4.5% on the treasury bonds. It's 90% treasury bond and 10% Bitcoin. And when Bitcoin goes up, you split that with the government, right? So it allows the government to add Bitcoin to its strategic reserve. But the growth rate on these bonds was 10, 15, 20%. So if you want to, like, the reason this is important right now is because if the US wants to maintain global reserve currency status, they're going to need to increase demand for the bonds. But at this point in time, like inflation is running so fucking hot that nobody's buying a bond to get 4.5% a year, right? The demand just isn't there for them. And they're going to have to lower that rate because they have a ton of debt to refinance. So it's like, it's this never ending cycle. But when you just put a 10% Bitcoin allocation mixed with 90% of a bond, you completely remove the downside of Bitcoin's volatility if it were to crash, but you get all of the gains of the upside. And this is like, I mean, this is a ton of capital that can come into Bitcoin. The other reason that I like this that I've been thinking about a lot was the I think that this is a smooth transition from the fiat standard to the Bitcoin standard. And what I mean by that is we all have this, like, a lot of Bitcoiners have this dream. They're like, one day we're going to wake up and, like, the fiat's going to blow up and Bitcoin is just going to be the thing that we use. As I said before, I'm an optimist. I am very bullish on humanity. If that were to happen, the chaos and destruction and the pain that all of our friends and family who are not in Bitcoin, like the amount of pain that they would go through, I think a lot of us would be very, very upset. And what I think the Bitcoin backed bond has the potential to do is smooth that transition between a fiat standard to a Bitcoin standard, right? It allows us to keep the dollar propped up a little bit longer, right? Keep the US global reserve status going a little bit longer so that more people can get access to Bitcoin, right? And like the Bitcoin backed bond, it's a 90-10 allocation, right? 90% treasury, 10% Bitcoin. Like I could see that number starting to switch a little bit as Bitcoin gets more credibility. And I don't know. And like I said, I'm not a huge technical analysis kind of guy, but I think that weaving Bitcoin in with the current financial system to soften the landing of an inevitable Bitcoin future is super, super, super important. And I think would be very good for the people that are around us that we love and care about that aren't in the Bitcoin space. And ultimately, right, that's what we want is a lot of us want our family and friends to be happy, to be healthy, to be able to afford groceries and the things they want to do. And you can only help them to a certain extent, right? They have to, at some point, kind of get their head out of the sand and start having small allocations. But I think things like the Bit Bond and, Bitcoin-backed mortgages and companies that are adopting a Bitcoin standard that now, like say your buddy invests in, Invesco QQQ, which is the fund that MicroStrategy is a part of now. Like they have an indirect exposure to Bitcoin. If another company like, I don't know, Microsoft or Apple are the big ones, but like if another company that's in the S&P 500 starts a Bitcoin treasury, right? Now they have indirect exposure to Bitcoin. And I think those things are super, super powerful for smoothing the transitions between the world we live in now and the world we all want to live in, right? With a sound money standard and, kind of a world of truth. And so that's, let me see here, guys. I'm going to check my notes real quick. And I want to make sure I got touched on everything here. Yeah, I mean, I think that's about it for today, guys. I guess the last thing I'll say is I think M2 money supply hit we'll give you a little number go up, but it's at the end, so you gotta stay for the whole episode to get number go up talk. So the M2 money supply hit I don't know if it was an all-time high or all-time, highest in X amount of time. But anyway, it's a leading indicator. It seems to have been a leading indicator for Bitcoin for a while. So I don't, we'll see what happens, right? But like, I don't know how much longer we're going to be chopping around this 80K price. The macro environment has been very risk off. Traditionally, Bitcoin has struggled in risk-off environments because it's highly liquid. And in a risk-off environment, you don't sell what you want to, you sell what you need to, right? You sell what you can. And because of Bitcoin's liquidity profile, like it's an easy thing to sell when times get tough. So it's mirroring that risk-off environment. That being said, guys, like we're still at 82,000, right around 80K Bitcoin, and the money printers haven't even fired up yet. So we'll see what the Fed does when they meet tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised if they cut. Maybe they stay put for another meeting because inflation was under the number, but just barely. They said 3% was target inflation. I think it came back at 2.9. So we'll see, guys. But I would say, we'll, keep stacking. Don't over leverage yourself. As if you heard the first episode, I lost everything in the last bear market. I think that we still have a little ways to run. And, like the money, once the money printer fires up, if the US actually starts buying, like, who knows where this is going to go, right? Who knows if the 4-year cycles are dead, and maybe because the asset's changing, that's the case, right? Like maybe it's just more, maybe the new cycle isn't 4 years. Maybe you get a little bit of a bump at the halving or after the halving because the supply shock, but maybe this is the new thing where we chop for 7-8 months and then we hit a new all-time high, right? And then we chop at or below for 7-8 months and we hit a new one. I'm not sure. But do your research, make sure that you understand this thing, right? And that's why I wanted to talk about the use cases today, is because I know it gets a little bit nervy when we're chopping around the same price for a while. Everyone's like, what the fuck's happening? Where are we going from here? Like, lean back on the principles of this thing, guys. There's so much real world utility. People who don't understand the real world utility either haven't done the research or they're stuck in their, as Alex Gladstein calls it, their financial privilege bubble, right? They just can't put themselves in other people's shoes. And so with that being said, guys, I think I am going to sign off here today. I appreciate all of the support. All of you listening. If you can, guys, subscribe to the podcast, leave a comment, leave a like. I appreciate everything. And I'm trying to get better week after week. That's the goal, with proof of work, we'll turn this thing into something big. So thank you guys for tuning in.